All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank everyone for joining. This is our third in a three-part series this winter regarding Veritas NetBackup. Today we'll be speaking about NetBackup intelligent policies. My name is Christian Muma. I'm the lead for our data protection practice here at NetX. On the meeting, I also have MJ Johnson, our National Account Manager, and Angelo Shasha, our Senior Vice President. Before we get started about NetBackup, I just have one slide here to quickly tell everyone about NetX and who we are. We'd like to say first that we're an engineering company. Each of our practice leads has at least 10 years experience in their respective area of expertise. Myself, I've been a NetBackup consultant for the past 11 years. So we provide technical knowledge for implementing or architecting or designing each of the products that we sell. Currently, we dedicate a single partner we're a dedicated partner to each respective area that we cover. When I started with NetX earlier in 2015, that was solely Symantec. Naturally, with the split between Symantec and Veritas, we became a two-vendor partner, and just recently we started a partnership with Pure Storage, and we've already had some pretty good wins there and some nice deployments, so we're excited about that as well. Today's webinar is being recorded. You can find it at netxinc.com/netx-webinars. We'll follow up with an email after the webinar that has that link as well, so you'll be able to go back and watch it. You'll also be able to view the other two webinars in this series, one regarding the NetBackup 5330 appliance and another one showing the new features of NetBackup 7.7 and 7.7.1. All right, so we'll get started with today's topic. Today we're talking about NetBackup intelligent policies. So we'll take a look at the advantages of using intelligent policies, how they work, and then we'll look at examples in the lab of VMware intelligent policies, Oracle intelligent policies, and the latest edition in NetBackup 7.7.1, which is Microsoft SQL policies. So what do NetBackup intelligent policies do? Basically, they're a way to automate the backup selections so that you no longer have to specify individual backup clients in each policy. This allows us to follow the data wherever it may live, whether it's another node in the cluster or a completely separate application altogether. Great advantage of intelligent policies are consolidating multiple backup policies into one. We'll see that most notably with Oracle and SQL. It also allows us to discover our data as it's introduced to the environment and protect it in a more seamless manner and add some efficiencies to our processes. Additionally, it allows us to manage resources more efficiently. And it drastically reduces the level of effort required for backup administration. So it makes things quite a bit easier. So this is kind of a generalized idea of how intelligent policies work, whether it is for VMware, Hyper-V, or Oracle or SQL, they're all kind of the same, whereby the master server performs some sort of discovery on the environment. With Oracle and SQL, the databases, they can be added manually, but there's also a feature that will actually go out and explore the network and look for other instances. With VMware, it queries vCenter directly to obtain that list. So once that inventory comes back to the master server, that has one giant list, and then the results of a query are what the backup policy is based on. So if you want to select all VMs that belong to a particular cluster or a certain criteria for Oracle databases, you define that in the intelligent policy, and it selects those from the inventory list that's created. As we move along, If you have any questions, please enter it in the questions portion of the webinar chat, and I'll periodically stop and take a look and try to get those answered. If for whatever reason I miss your question or it doesn't get answered, please respond to the email that comes out after the webinar, and I'll make sure that we get an answer to you. Okay, so first we'll take a look at VMware intelligent policies. We'll take a look at the advantages and disadvantages and then an example. VMware policies, intelligent policies for VMware have been around for, I think it's 5 or 6 years now. So they're probably the ones that most people are familiar with. The advantages, as I was stating before, is that it allows your backup policies to follow virtual machines as they migrate to different hosts or data stores or clusters. Newly added virtual machines can be automatically included in a policy as long as you follow a process that would include them in the query, the backup selection query. And then conversely, decommissioned virtual machines are automatically removed. So that removes some of the effort of maintaining that and saves some backup failures and unwarranted troubleshooting. It allows you to consolidate policies quite a bit, which is an advantage. And I think the last point here is one that's often overlooked. It allows us to control resources. So we can specify a certain number of VMs backing up at any given time and base that on whether they reside on the same data store, the same host, same cluster, things of that nature. We'll take a look at that in a minute. Some of the disadvantages of using intelligent policies for VMware would be that you're unable to select an individual VM for backup. So if you have a change control and you want to back up a VM quickly before you implement that, you can't go to your standard policy or the one that backs it up every night and specify that individual virtual machine. Another disadvantage is that it's a little more difficult to integrate with third-party schedulers because you can't select individual VMs or you can't tie a process like nightly processing or some sort of data manipulation to the start and end time of that specific VM. It makes it a little bit harder to integrate with third-party schedulers. This last disadvantage here was actually resolved in, I believe it was NetBackup version 7.6, and that is manual restarts of individual VM backups from the activity monitor. As long as the job has been initiated, you're now able to go in and right-click on it and restart it like you would a regular file system backup. All right, so we'll go take a look in our demo environment. And here I have a VMware intelligent policy. The first tab looks similar to the traditional method of VMware backups. You can check accelerator, pick your storage unit, things of that nature. Scheduling looks the same as it would with a traditional VM policy as well. The biggest difference is the Clients tab. So in here, you can actually create a query that will go out and search all vCenter or all ESX hosts that you have registered with NetBackup and return VMs based on your search criteria. So for example, here I have VMs where the ESX server contains the letters ESX01 and the display name does not equal home MBU01. So if we run a test query, this is applying that logic to all the VMs in this environment. And we can see that these four VMs are included, and this one VM that matches our exclusion in the query is marked as excluded from the test query. So it makes things a lot easier. You can use VMware tagging. So if we look in, this is the vSphere 6 web client. A new thing introduced to vSphere 6 is tagging. With vSphere, you're no longer allowed to create custom attributes but they do allow the tag feature. So if I go to my inventory of VMs, we can add a tag to this server, HomeWin1. We will assign the Windows tag. And now, if we create a new policy, we'll make it a VMware policy. Give our MSDP pool as the storage unit. Under the Clients tab, we can create a query for anything that has a tag equal to Windows. We'll add that and now test the query. And we'll see the same set of VMs, but this time the only one that's included is HomeWin01, which is the VM that we applied the Windows tag to. So that becomes useful to VMware administrators. Let's say there are certain VMs that they wanted included in backups. They could just tag that VM with the word backup, and then maybe your VM query would look for those tags. Or if there's certain VMs that they wanted to they wanted to be in a policy that's scheduled to run at 3 a.m., they could tag that virtual machine with the tag 3 a.m., and you can schedule your policy accordingly. Other useful things, although it's not directly related to intelligent policies, but while we're here, we might as well show it. This is the NetBackup plugin for the vSphere web client, and you can see that you get a nice dashboard summary of which VMs are backed up, how many backups occur each day. If you look at this list of virtual machines, you can see which VMs have a successful backup and the last time they were backed up. Here's a list of VMs that don't have a backup. If you'll remember from my VMware policy, we excluded this one by display name. So that's pretty useful. Also, if you're familiar with VMware Instant Recovery, you can now initiate that from vCenter. So a VMware admin would be able to come in, search for the display name of a host, and then add it to this wizard and actually initiate instant recovery of that virtual machine. All right. Continuing here with VMs, we'll take a look at some of the best practices. So usually the rule of thumb is you would only want 2 virtual machine backups concurrently per data store. This is usually for snapshot reasons. So while each VM is being backed up, the additional snapshots are created on the data store, and you don't want to run out of free space with your snapshots. Additionally, 4 virtual machine backups per host is usually recommended so that you can maintain throughput and don't run into any performance problems. Specifying vCenter as virtual machine server is recommended because that will give you the highest level of perspective and only one set of credentials to manage. So if you have 10 ESX hosts in your environment and you're specifying ESX hosts as virtual machine servers, you would need to maintain a credential set for each of those. Whereas if your entire environment is controlled by vCenter, you could just use the one credential set and only talk to vCenter. I recommend using the display name as the client name and the NetBackup catalog name. This is because a Windows or Linux admin may change the host name of a virtual machine, and if something happens to it and the VMware admins are requesting a complete recovery of that machine, or they try to use instant recovery through the vSphere web client, they won't be able to find it by the new host name. So I would recommend using the display name as the client name. Another thing is to be very specific with the transport type you intend to use. We'll take a look at that, whether it's SAN or NBD. If you don't specify the transport type, it could waste time trying each one until it finds one that works. Using meaningful queries, especially in large environments, usually saves a lot of time troubleshooting and helps ease resource constraints. And lastly here, there's a utility that comes with NetBackup called SymQuies, and it can be installed on Linux servers to help them quiesce file systems for Linux, so ext3 and ext2 file systems. For Windows, it uses VSS writers to quiesce NTFS, so there's nothing additional that needs to be installed. But for Linux, if you want to make sure that you have a consistent snapshot of your VM, the SymQuies utility will do that. So we looked at the schedules, we looked at the clients, which is where we configure the query. There's also an advanced mode here, and all this does is turn your query into a text block. Most people use the regular basic view. Backup selections will be that query. There's nothing to manually edit in here. And then this last tab is where we can set the parameters specific to VMware. So typically everyone would want to enable file recovery from VM backup. That's basically what has traditionally been referred to as a single pass backup, whereby you can restore individual files from a vSphere API backup. Exclude deleted blocks is self-explanatory, as well as exclude swap and paging files. Those are options you'd want to select to save space on your backup target. Earlier, when I was referring to specifying the available transport mode, that's done in this section. So in this environment, we're using hot add, where the backup server is actually on the same data store and ESX environment as the backup targets. Typically in an enterprise environment, you would either use SAN, where your backup server is zoned and masked and mapped to the LUNs of your ESX environment, or NBD, where the snapshots are mounted over TCP/IP. And here's where you can set the VM identifier, and this is where earlier I was suggesting to use the display name. And then for orphan snapshot removal, typically we would only want it to remove NetBackup snapshots that are there that for whatever reason weren't deleted. All right, so we'll go ahead and run this policy, and we'll do a differential backup. And this is where earlier I was saying one of the disadvantages is that you cannot specify individual VMs. It will back up everything that's included in the query. So we'll switch over to the activity monitor. And you can see a parent job running here, and then our individual VM backup jobs start. So this is the snapshot job for the client home win01, and here's the actual backup job. And if we go back to vCenter, we should be able to see tasks running in the bottom. Let's see, for home win1, we can see where the snapshots are being created, and we can see from the previous backups where they were created and removed. So we'll switch back over, and we can see that this backup is running. And the reason why the other three are queued are because of the resource constraints I spoke about earlier. We'll go ahead and show that now. So under the master server properties, there's a resource limit section. And in here you can see for VMware, I have it set to only allow one backup per data store. You can limit that also to ESX server. This is where typically I would suggest only 4 backups per ESX server and 2 per data store in your typical enterprise environment. In our lab here, it's not quite as robust, so I limit it to 1 backup per data store. And then as soon as that one finishes, another one comes out of the queue and starts backing up. All right, so that's pretty much it for VMware Intelligent Policies. I don't see any questions in the question portion of the chat. So if you do have any, please feel free to put them in there now. And like I said, I'll periodically take a break and glance over there. If your question doesn't get answered, please respond to the email that comes out after the webinar, and we'll get it answered then. So next we'll take a look at Oracle Intelligent Policies. One of the biggest advantages to this is it allows us to consolidate Oracle policies. So most environments that we go into have 1 or 2 policies for each Oracle database. And that's just because it's easier to maintain the scripts that way. But with intelligent policies, we'll see where we can drastically reduce that. The second advantage is that it eliminates the maintenance of all those backup scripts. Now everything's done dynamically through the NetBackup APIs, and the RMAN run block is configured by NetBackup itself at the time of the backup. It allows us to discover unprotected data. We can easily tune the backup performance, and it provides us a centralized location to manage backup credentials. Some of the disadvantages to Oracle Intelligent Policies, the DBAs do lose some control. So if it's an environment where the database administrators maintain the backup scripts themselves, they will lose that. Not all of the options that are available for RMAN are in the policy configuration. So if you're doing something very specialized in your environment, you may not be able to repeat those tasks with an intelligent policy. And lastly, traditional Oracle policies may still be needed for process integration. So if you have something that relies on the backup start and notify scripts, or something that's run by a third-party scheduler, it may become more difficult to find something suitable with intelligent policies to get the same behavior. All right, so the way we use Oracle Intelligent Policies, there's a new section here in the admin GUI for applications, and we can see Oracle and SQL in here. In this section, you register your instances of Oracle. There's also an option for NetBackup to go out and discover them. So here we have 2 instances. There's actually only one of these is active that we can see was registered on December 11th. There are also Oracle instance groups. So for this, if you maintain the same credential set for specific Oracle instances, you can put them in the same group and then manage the credentials from just one location. So in here you have the options of using OS credentials, database credentials, so you could use sys or sysdba, or all the other typical options that you would have to back up an Oracle database. So once you have instances registered or discovered and in your groups created, you can come back and create an Oracle policy using an intelligent query. So for this one, the first page here looks typically like any other Oracle policy. It's the policy type is Oracle. We're selecting our MSDP storage pool. This is where things start to get a little different. With a standard Oracle policy, normally you would have automatic backup schedules and application backup schedules. You no longer have that. Now you can have your full incremental and archive log schedules all in the same spot, and you don't have to add any logic to your backup script. So we'll actually take a break from this and go back and take a look at the traditional method. So traditionally, when you would create an Oracle policy, switch over here. So right now it's selected to use an intelligent policy. We'll have to change this to use scripts or templates. And now it will appear as a traditional Oracle policy. So you would always get your default application backup, and this is the schedule that would be used similar to a user-directed backup, where when the script runs on the backup client, this is the schedule where you actually set your retention. So to schedule a backup through NetBackup, you would have to come in and select an application backup, and then you would configure your typical start window. And then this schedule would call a script, wherever you would put that. And what that would look like on the backup client is something like this. And here you would see a typical script that you would have to maintain to back up Oracle, where you set parameters, tell it where you want to put logging at. You have to specify Oracle home. So that can be problematic if you have one Oracle server that has databases using different Oracle homes. Now your script needs to add some sort of logic to select which Oracle home to use depending on which database you want to back up. People would often create wrapper scripts for each database, which just adds a little more complication. And same thing with Oracle SID. You would need some sort of logic or wrapper script to change that depending on which database you wanted to back up. And here's another problem with the traditional method is that your connection string and your credentials oftentimes would have to be stored in clear text in the script itself. So you could change permission of that script, the file, and limit who can read it, but it's still not advisable to have your credentials set out there in plain text. So all of that's taken care of using an intelligent policy where you apply your credentials to specific instances and then register that with NetBackup. Traditionally as well, we'll scroll down to the run block, and you can see the parameters that would get passed to NetBackup. You'd have to send which policy you want to use, which schedule you want to use. So you would have to maintain different schedules, how many proxy streams you want to allow, things of that nature. And now that's all configurable through this last tab here. So you can specify the number of parallel streams that you'd like. You could put image limits on the size of your backup sets. You can change what the backup files are named as. And all those options are now configurable in the policy itself. And what happens, so I don't want to see those changes. We'll go ahead and run a backup here. And what happens now is that run block is created dynamically by the NetBackup client. And we can see that in the job details of this job. So here we can see the run block where it allocates the channels. It sets all of those parameters, so the policy name, the schedule name, all of those don't need to be created in a script by logic or a wrapper script or some other device. They can all be changed dynamically on the fly by the policy. And then we'll see the same sort of thing where our database files are backed up first, and then it starts on control files and archive logs. And you'll also notice on the Oracle tab, all the parameters are configurable here for archive logs as well. And then you can control which type of backup it is by the schedule. So this is a schedule that only backs up archive logs. All right, and here I have some best practices to follow with intelligent policies. So you'll still want to configure it. It uses proxy by default, but you'll still want to configure it to use add a single file per backup set or proxy. And the reason for this is efficiency on deduplication devices. If you're going straight to tape, it doesn't really matter that much, but if you're going to a NetBackup appliance or any other deduplication appliance, you want it to stream consistently each time so that when the deduplication algorithms go in and break down file segments, it will be the same for each backup. Another best practice is to tune multi-streaming. So you'll want to take a look and try things out. We'll go back to the policy here and try different numbers of parallel streams and see which one gets best performance. It's a lot easier to do now because you don't have to actually edit the backup script. You can just do it from here. And lastly, if you need multiple log backups, or some folks have log replication going on, and if the archive logs get deleted before the replication is completed, they have an incomplete replication set. So the way to get around that is under this Oracle tab, you can say delete logs after making a certain number of copies. So if you set that to 2 or 3, it will leave the archive logs there until the second or third backup of them. And that allows your replication to catch up. All right, so that's it for Oracle Intelligent Policies. I don't see any questions in here. So again, if you do have any questions, feel free to post them in there and we'll move along. So our last topic is Microsoft SQL Intelligent Policies, and this is very similar to the Oracle Intelligent Policies. So some of the advantages are, again, that one of the biggest ones, you're able to consolidate all the SQL policies. You eliminate the need to maintain all the various batch files on each SQL server. You can go out and discover unprotected data, and it's easier to tune the backup performance. Again, like Oracle, it allows for centralized management of your credentials. So we'll take a look. I have a SQL server here. And traditionally, when you would run a SQL backup, you would need batch files. So here's an example of one that specifies what databases get backed up in some of your configuration parameters. NetBackup does provide a GUI to create these files. So typically you would go in, select what you want backed up and what type of backup. So here we'll say backup all the databases. Let's do a full backup. Use any NetBackup policies. We'll just keep this simple, and then we'll say to save that. Whoops. And we'll save this as test in the MS SQL directory of the database extension folder. So if we open it in Notepad, it looks something like this. So this can be customized to a great deal. And here, Veritas has a nice tech note on all the different parameters that we can use. And you can see there's quite a long list. So there's an extensive amount of customization available, but it does make things a little more complicated and harder to track and keep control of. So now with intelligent policies, we can go back and, as with Oracle, you would register a SQL instance. Here I only have one, but despite that, I created a SQL group. And you can add multiple instances to a single group and manage them all with one credential set, which makes things quite a bit easier. And then once you have your SQL instances registered, you can see this policy looks pretty much like your standard SQL policy. But as with Oracle, now everything can be consolidated into one. So you no longer have automatic backup schedules and application backup schedules. Now you just have backup, full, incremental, and transaction log schedules. And like with Oracle, you can select to protect individual instances or a group. So if you were protecting a specific instance, you can come in and select those and be a little more granular with what you want to back up. So here you can specify individual databases that you'd like to back up. But in this case, we'll switch it back to using a group, and then we'll come in and select our SQL group. And then for backup selections, 99% of the time, users would want to back up the whole database. But you do have an option to back up individual file groups or individual files. And then lastly, this Microsoft SQL Server tab has all the configuration parameters that we showed, or excuse me, not all the configuration parameters that we showed in the tech note, but this has the most relevant ones. So here we can change the number of backup stripes, the number of parallel backup operations, to get a little bit more performance out of our backups. Usually you'll want to do a few databases at a time. And you have the same parameters for backing up archive logs, transaction logs for SQL. And then again, the option at the bottom here to truncate logs after they're backed up. So we'll go ahead and run a manual backup of the SQL policy. And this looks pretty much as you would expect it to, as if you were using a batch file. One thing to note is with Oracle, where we saw that run block created and we could view it in the job details, for SQL, it does something similar, but it's on the server where it creates these temporary input files. So if we look at these, we can see that they look like a SQL batch file, but they were actually created dynamically as the policy was kicked off. So we'll move back over and we can see our database is backing up. So this is the AdventureWorks database. And here's our report server database. So after that, it looks pretty much like a regular SQL backup. And with the SQL backups as well as the Oracle backups with intelligent policies, the restore looks the same as it did using a script. So that part hasn't been affected. So disadvantages of using SQL intelligent policies. As I was saying earlier, there's a limited number of configuration items. I would say that most of what people use are listed in there in that policy, but not everything in that list from the tech note is configurable with an intelligent policy. Processes that use dbbackup.exe or other automation still require traditional backup policy, so you can't manually start a backup from the SQL client itself. It has to be initiated through NetBackup if you're using an intelligent policy. Some best practices are kind of like with Oracle, where you only want one file per set, one stripe per database, where performance allows that. If that's too slow and you have to use multiple stripes per database, that's certainly an option. You'll just get a little bit. Your deduplication rates won't quite be as efficient. It's not as bad as using multiple files per set with Oracle, but there is a little bit of a hit there as far as deduplication efficiency. Typically, though, you would want to add parallelism rather than multiple stripes per database to increase performance. Use SQL instance groups to simplify authentication so that you don't have to maintain credentials for each SQL database. You can use a group with one standard credential set and even have the database admin enter in the NetBackup GUI so that he doesn't even have to share the credentials with the backup admin. Also, I'm not sure if I covered it when we were looking at the policy, but there's an option to convert differential backups to full backups when no full backup exists. And I can't see a reason to not have this selected. So if you look at the last tab here, there's a checkbox at the bottom of both the database and transaction log sections. So that way, if you, for whatever reason, your full backups have expired, it will actually take a full backup instead of an incremental so that you have your entire data set and maintain recoverability. That's about it for SQL. So I don't see any questions in the question section. If you have any questions, now would be the time to ask, or just respond to the email that comes out following the webinar, and we'll make sure to follow up with you. All right, and again, webinars are posted on our website at www.netx.com, netxinc.com, and this webinar or a version of it will be posted there soon. If you missed the first two webinars for the NetBackup 5330 appliance or what's new with NetBackup 7.7 and 7.7.1, feel free to go there and check them out. Also, we offer training, and you can find more information about that on our websites as well. Our training courses, we offer them in a virtual classroom, and they're always guaranteed to run. We don't cancel. Even if there's only one student, we'll still hold the class. All right, so no more questions popping up. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining today, and we'll talk to you soon.